A curtain shifts, revealing danger. Welcome to Wolfe's Casebook. I am your host, Enigma. Share where you're tuning in from. I always enjoy your comments. Let's slip into the mystery. If there's one thing you learn working for Nero Wolfe, besides the fact that orchids can be treated like royalty and humans like suspects, it's that the brownstone has a pulse. Not a sentimental one. More like a well-trained animal that knows its territory and resents strangers that step on the rug. That Tuesday, the pulse was annoyed before I even got my hat off. I'd come in from a late lunch on 10th Avenue, the kind where the corned beef has a sense of humor and the counterman keeps score in his head. The air inside the hall smelled faintly of polish and old stone, which is how Wolfe insists it should smell. And to me, it always feels like stepping out of New York and into Wolfe's private country. Usually that country is neutral ground. That day it wasn't. From the front room I heard voices. One of them was Fritz Brenner's soft German baritone, and that never raises a hair on my head. The other one was female, clipped and strong, used to being listened to. Not angry, exactly, but sharp in a way that could take a slice out of your shirt. I hung up my coat and went in. The stranger was sitting on the red leather chair to the left of Wolfe's desk, where clients sit and either become sensible or expose themselves. She was in her early 30s, maybe a touch younger in the cheeks, with a kind of calm that had a spine under it. Dark hair pinned up with casual precision, grey suit that was probably expensive without wanting applause, and eyes that didn't blink much. The sort of eyes that have watched meetings go sideways and stayed in the room anyway. Wolfe was behind the desk, of course, in the throne that has a groove in it shaped like him. He had his hands folded on the blotter, his head tilted slightly away from the woman, which is his version of polite distance. His eyelids were lowered as if he were listening to a sermon he didn't believe in. That was a good sign. When Wolfe truly doesn't care, he doesn't bother looking bored. Boredom takes effort. Fritz stood by the sideboard, not serving anything because Wolfe doesn't serve drinks at this hour, unless the day has already proved it deserves alcohol. He nodded at me, and I slid into my chair at the side of Wolfe's desk. I didn't say a word. You don't interrupt a client unless Wolfe is asleep, and he almost never is. The woman was saying, "I'm not asking you to chase a man with a knife through Central Park. I understand your methods, Mr. Wolfe. I'm asking you to think." Wolfe murmured, "That is a habit." There are people who would take that as rudeness. She didn't. She also didn't smile. She looked at Wolfe the way you look at a locked door you intend to open. "My name is Clara Vane," she said. "I'm a partner at Huxley & Vane, Broadway. We handle acquisitions, commercial litigation, corporate restructuring. You won't have heard of me personally, but you may have heard of the firm." "I have," Wolfe said. "You are solvent." "Highly. Which is why I can pay what you require." Wolfe lifted his eyelids a fraction. I knew that look. It meant she'd just bought herself another minute. "I can pay," she repeated, "because I have to be sure I'm not buying a lawsuit with my own firm's name on it." Wolfe turned his head toward her. He still didn't move anything else. That's the nice thing about a man as big as Wolfe. When he moves ahead, it feels like a decision. "You have a specific problem," he said. "State it. Mr. Goodwin will take notes, assuming it is not trivial." She glanced at me for the first time. The glance had weight to it. I gave her my standard, "You're safe, I'm harmless, but I'm also the one who'll remember what you say." Grin. "My problem," she said, "is a curtain." I blinked. Wolfe didn't. "A curtain," he repeated. "Yes, in my home. It moved last night." Wolfe's mouth made its smallest possible expression of disapproval. "Madame, if you have a draft—" "There was no draft," she cut in, then checked herself. "Not apologetically, just tactically. I'm not here because I don't know how windows work. The curtain moved because someone was behind it." "Ah." Wolfe's "ah" is not a word. It's a drawer opening in his mind. I set my pencil on the pad. Fritz looked faintly unhappy in the background, which was probably because no one had offered to sit down to a decent meal with a curtain. Clara Vane went on. I live on West 72nd, one of those pre-war buildings with a lobby that thinks it's a hotel. I was in the living room at 10:30, alone, reading a file. There's a set of drapes by the window, heavy, lined. The window was closed. I had no fan on. The drapes moved, not a flutter, a pull, like something brushed them aside. And you saw a person? No, that's the point. I stood up and went over. There was nothing behind them, nothing in the room. I checked the hall, the bedroom, the kitchen, the fire escape. She said it all quickly, as if she was aware of how thin it sounded and wanted to stack it with facts. No one. You called the police? No. Wolfe's nostrils widened. Not much, but enough that I knew he was debating whether to say something unkind. Why not? Because no one had taken anything. Because it's ridiculous, and because I had reason to believe, before that moment, that someone might be trying to frighten me into a mistake. I don't make mistakes under pressure from men with a badge. So I came here. That last part was smooth. She'd done her homework. Wolfe likes being chosen. You believe someone entered your apartment, he said, with the intention of intimidation rather than theft. On what grounds? Shu hesitated for the first time. Not in the eyes, in the voice. Because yesterday I told 3 people no. A significant no. The most significant one I've issued in my career. Wolfe didn't ask to whom yet. He let the silence sit there to make her volunteer. A Wolfe silence is a big piece of furniture. People bump into it. She did. The Galen estate, she said. An old trust. Old money, old scandals, old art. They want to sell. She reached into a leather portfolio on her lap and drew out a thin folder but didn't open it. My firm represents the estate. There are 4 potential buyers. I informed 3 of them yesterday that their bids were over, and the 4th that we were reconsidering terms. And you are concerned the rejected bidders may retaliate, against you personally. Yes. Why personally? Because, she said, and finally a faint color came into her face. The estate is not just a client. I'm an executor. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Then you have a fiduciary duty. Exactly. There are internal politics. The Galen family is scattered. Grandchildren who don't speak to each other except through attorneys. Legacy issues. The painting at the center of this is worth a fortune and worth more than money to some of them. One executor can ruin things for the rest. I've been careful. Too careful, maybe. What painting? The one they all want, she said. A small Venetian piece, 18th century, not a major name, but a major provenance. It's called The Curtain That Moved Without Wind. I had to swallow my first wisecrack because it was too good something. Wolfe's eyelids did a slow rise. I could almost see the internal filing system arranging itself. That is a curious title, he said. So I thought, she replied. The Galens have had it for over 100 years. It hung in their library. Now it's crated in a secure storage facility while the estate decides who gets it. There are arguments about whether it should be sold at all. And you are the obstacle. I'm the person who insists we follow the will and the law. That makes me the obstacle to 3 different kinds of greed. Wolfe leaned back half an inch, a huge movement for him. List these 3 bidders. She took a breath. First, Alain Roussel, dealer, East 57th. He wants it for private resale in Europe. Second, Marion Ives, collector, the kind that collects museums the way other people collect spoons. Third, a foundation controlled by a man named Lyle Reinhardt. He's a philanthropy hawk. He wants it for his new cultural center in Queens. She let that land. The 4th bidder is a family member, Theo Galen. He wants to keep it in the family. Yesterday I told him we might have to accept a higher outside bid if he couldn't match it. And he was displeased. He was furious. Is he violent? Not in the usual sense, she said. But he's desperate. Desperate men are often inconvenient. Wolfe lifted a hand a fraction, which meant he was assembling the board. You said you told 3 people no. You told Mr. Galen no as well, in effect, and you are reconsidering. That is 4. Why did you say 3? She caught it, and there was a flicker like a match going out. Because Theo doesn't count as a buyer in my mind. He's family, even if he behaves like a bidder. Wolfe nodded once. That was all. I wrote it down. If Archie Goodwin writes something down, he thinks there's a chance it matters later. Your apartment intrusion, Wolfe said, provided no tangible evidence. None that I found. And your building has doormen? Yes, 24 hours. You believe they can be circumvented? By someone with a key, perhaps, or someone who belongs there. Wolfe let that last word echo. Or by someone with a reputation that discourages scrutiny. She watched him. I could see the part of her that was lawyer and the part of her that was person. The lawyer was braced. The person was tired. Mr. Wolfe, she said, not pleading but putting a weight on his name, I'm not afraid of ghosts. I'm afraid of people who don't want a sale to proceed unless it's on their terms. If last night was a warning, I need to know what kind. I do not accept cases based on theatrical phenomena, Wolfe said, nor on anxiety alone. Her jaw tightened. Then I'll be blunt. There was a note on my table this morning. That moved the pulse of the brownstone from annoyed to interested. Fritz made a tiny sound that could have been sympathy or curiosity. Wolfe didn't move, but I saw a small change in his eyes, the way water changes when a stone goes in. What note? He asked. She opened the folder and took out a single sheet of paper inside a plastic sleeve, held it by the edges as if it might smear. She leaned forward and set it on Wolfe's desk. I leaned forward too, because that's my job and because I like knowing what's happening on paper. The note was typed on a plain white sheet. No letterhead, no watermark, nothing clever. 4 lines. Centered. When the curtain moves, look behind it. You won't like what you find. There wasn't a signature. There was no obvious stamp on the paper. The typography was standard business typewriter stuff, which means nothing and everything. Wolfe read it without expression. Then he looked at her. Where was this placed? On my coffee table. I know it wasn't there last night when I went to bed. I'm meticulous about my work table. Did you touch it? Only to put it in the sleeve. I have associates who can handle prints if needed. Good. Wolfe pushed the sheet slightly toward me with 2 fingers. Mr. Goodwin will take custody of that. I pulled it toward my pad. Sure, I'll give it a warm home and a bedtime story. Clara Vane ignored that. She was waiting for a Wolfe, and Wolfe was waiting for something else that only he knew he needed. He found it. In your opinion, he said, who benefits from your fare? All of them. She said it promptly, as if she'd rehearsed that part of the argument in the taxi over. If I panic, I make a procedural mistake, I telegraph my decisions too early, I soften on terms, I accept a dirty condition. Any one of them could use that. And among them, who has access to your apartment? She paused again, this time longer. Theo Galen has been there. Once, he came to discuss the family bid. He was with me for an hour. He knows the layout. Only once. Yes. Anyone else? Not since I moved there. Certainly none of the bidders. I've met Roussel at my office. Ives only through counsel. Reinhardt twice at public events. She added, but there are people around the estate who might. She hesitated. An art advisor. A family lawyer. Staff. Names? She gave them. I wrote them down. An advisor named Julian Culp, a family attorney named Sidonia Pike, head of household staff named Lenore Vale. There were 2 younger Galens, siblings of Theo, Silas and Petra, who were against selling. There was an older aunt, Beatrice, who could turn a committee into a bonfire with one sentence. The names had weight. Some of them had angles. Wolfe listened, his face like a bank vault. When she finished, he sat in silence long enough that she started to shift in her seat. Then he said, "You have come to me for protection against coercion." "For understanding," she corrected, "and to stop it before it becomes more than a note." "The note is already more than a note." Wolfe lowered his eyes for a moment, thinking. "Tell me, Miss Vane, why are you the executor rather than a Galen itself?" "My mother was a Galen." "Oh?" That "oh" was not neutral. It had a hook. "She married out. She died 12 years ago. The patriarch, Edwin Galen, trusted her judgment. In his will he appointed me and Julian Culp and Theo Galen jointly, 3 executors. And yet you are the one threatened." She looked at him sharply. "That's what I'm trying to determine." Wolfe nodded. Then he looked past her at Fritz. "Beer." Fritz's eyebrows went up, but he moved. The time was off for beer, so he knew something had just changed. When Wolfe wants a drink before dinner, he's either disgusted with humanity or fascinated by it. This didn't feel like disgust. He took the mug, had one sip, set it down, and said to her, "I will accept your case." She blinked. "You will?" "Yes." "On what terms?" "On my terms. I do not conduct business in your apartment or your office. You will bring your people here when I require it. You will not attempt to solve this yourself. You will not inform the police unless I authorize it. You will provide me with full access to all information concerning the estate, the bids, and the Galen family. If you hesitate, conceal, or prevaricate, I will dismiss you and require payment regardless." She didn't flinch. There are some women who would argue a clause to death even while their house is burning. She wasn't one of them. "What fee?" she asked. Wolfe said a number. She didn't blink. "Agreed." I'll admit it. My eyebrows did a jump. I know Wolfe's numbers. He had asked for enough to buy a modest car and the city's supply of orchids for a month. Wolfe watched her calmly. "There is one more condition." "Yes?" He looked at her for one long second, and I knew he was choosing whether to say it to test her or to set the game board right. "You are to remain here tonight," he said. "At least until I have spoken with Mr. Galen and the others. I do not like my clients to be frightened out of my reach." Her eyes widened. "Here, in the brownstone." "The brownstone," Wolfe said, "is not a hotel, but you may have a room for a night if you are to be useful and safe." She started to object. I could see it gathering in her shoulders, and then she let it go. "All right," she exhaled, "if that helps you." "It helps me," Wolfe said bluntly. I pushed the note into my folder. "Miss Vane, you'll find it's a nice place to be supervised. The orchids don't bite unless you insult them." She stood. Wolfe remained seated with all the immobility of a statue. Fritz had already started thinking about dinner accommodations like a man who is forced to rearrange the kingdom for a guest. Clara Vane held my gaze for a second. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "if this turns out to be nothing—" "It won't," I said. "Notes like that don't come from nothing. They come from somebody who thinks they're subtle." She nodded, as if that was precisely what she needed to hear. Then she turned to Wolfe. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," Wolfe said. "You have bought my attention. Now we will see what it is worth." After she left the office with Fritz to show her upstairs, I looked at Wolfe. "A curtain," I said. "You're slipping. Next, you'll take a case involving a haunted teacup." He didn't smile. That's how you knew a thought was already burning in him. "This is not about a curtain," he said. "It is about a painting named for a curtain and a note that employs that name. That is either poetic coincidence or calculated menace. I do not believe in coincidence." "Fair enough." I tapped my pencil. "Where do we start?" "We start," Wolfe said, "by inviting your Mr. Theo Galen to dinner. Inviting, I said. Sure. I'll call him and tell him our chef makes a mean veal stew and that the host won't be moving from his chair no matter how charming he is. Wolfe's eyes narrowed a hair's breadth. You will not mention veal. Man is already uneasy. We don't want him comforted. He paused. And Archie, yes? Do not underestimate a person who chooses a title like that for a painting. People who name things are confessing something. We must discover what. That was the kind of line that makes you want to light a cigarette and look wise, but I didn't because Wolfe hates cigarettes in his office, and also because I already had my hands full with a rich lawyer, a nervous brownstone, and a curtain that apparently had ideas about where it wanted to move. I went to the phone. New York outside was doing what it always does, honking, selling, sweating, lying. Inside, Wolfe had accepted a case he pretended to accept reluctantly, which meant he was halfway solved already. The rest of us were just going to run his errands until he proved it. Theo Galen answered on the third ring, which told me either he had been sitting by the phone waiting to explode at somebody, or he had a secretary who knew when not to screen calls. His voice had the coated flat sound of a man who thinks he's being reasonable while the rest of his body votes for arson. Galen, he said. Mr. Galen, Archie Goodwin, I told him. I work with Nero Wolfe. He'd like a word with you. There was a pause that had a little static in it. Why? Because you've got a stake in the Galen estate that could buy you either a painting or a headache the size of the Metropolitan. Miss Vane is here. She asked him to look into a matter that's begun to smell. He'd like to hear your side before it gets riper. I already gave her my side. I doubt you included the part about your feelings. Wolfe is famous for needing all the parts. I kept it easy. He requests your presence for dinner, 7:30. Dinner? The word came out like it had teeth. With Wolfe? Listen, I'm not a suspect in anything. I'm trying to keep my grandfather's property from being auctioned to vultures. Terrific. Then you'll enjoy explaining that to a man who knows the difference between a vulture and a hawk. 7:30 is him being cordial. Who the hell is Wolfe to me? I let a half-second of silence answer that, then said, he's the man who gets paid to see patterns where the rest of us see drapes moving. If you want that painting kept in the family, it might be smart to be in the room when he starts asking where the wind comes from. More silence. I heard a quick breath through his nose, the kind a man takes when he's reeling in a temper to use later. All right, he said. I'll come. But I'm not staying late, and I want it clear I'm not under accusation. Perfectly clear. You're under invitation. See you at 7:30. I hung up and turned. Wolfe hadn't moved, but his eyes were on me, and on my face they can be like a surgeon's hand. He knows where the nerve is before he touches it. He's coming, I said. Of course. Wolfe folded his fingers tighter. He is too proud to refuse a stage, or too worried not to watch it. I sat. You think he wrote that note? I think he wants you to think he did, or wants Miss Vane to think he might, or wants someone else to think either of those things. The note is not a threat to her alone. It is a maneuver. Nice of you to say so before I can. I dug my pen out again. What makes you sure it wasn't a random scare from one of the other bidders? Wolfe did something I've always liked. He didn't answer right away. He looked down at the blotter as if the words might be hiding in the grain. Then he said, the note uses the title of the painting. That title is not public, it is not in the newspapers, it is not on any gallery listing. Therefore, the writer has access to the estate's internal language. Or a good spy who likes art. Spies are expensive. This is not a matter for a professional outsider unless the professional outsider is being paid by an insider. We will learn which. What about the drape stunt? If the note writer had internal access, why break into her apartment instead of just mailing the thing? Because a mailed threat is abstract. A threatened room is intimate. It says, I can reach you. It also says, I may already have. Cheery. I glanced toward the hall. Fritz was in the kitchen, clinking like a man rearranging the universe with saucepans. Up the stairs, Clara Vane was in a guest room that probably felt like a museum wing. Should I talk to her now? Get more on Galen? No, she's frightened and therefore prone to exaggeration. I will speak with her after dinner, when she has observed our guest and had time to measure her own reaction. Meanwhile, you will go to her apartment. I stared. Now? Yes, before night. You will attempt to identify entry method and you will speak to the doorman. Also, if possible, you will obtain any security record the building maintains. Sure. I'll just saunter in and tell them I'm here to audit their incompetence. You will use tact. I've heard you are capable of it in emergencies. Rumors. All right. I stood, then paused. Wolfe, if this turns into a family knife fight, you know I can't resolve it by complimenting the upholstery. Then do not compliment the upholstery. Observe, and keep your eyes open for a curtain. That got a grunt out of me. I went upstairs 2 at a time, found Clara Vane in the guest room doorway with her sleeves rolled like she was about to cross-examine the wallpaper. She looked composed, but her eyes had a faint, feverish shine that told me she hadn't sat down since arriving. Miss Vane, I said, I'm heading to your place. Wolfe wants a look at the scene. Anything I should know that you didn't already say? Alarm codes, odd neighbors, polite ghosts. I'll write the code down, she said. And Archie, be careful with the doormen. One of them is new, the other is loyal to the Galens. His name is Karim. Loyal how? She hesitated, then decided not to dodge. His father worked for Edwin Galen. Karim has been around that family for years. If someone asked him for a key on a pretext, he might not question it. Good. That's exactly the kind of human factor I enjoy. I took the note she scribbled, pocketed it. Try to relax till dinner. If you feel the curtains itch, tell them to wait their turn. Her mouth twitched. Not a smile. More like permission for one later. I left before she could say anything else that might worry me. Out on the street, the afternoon was sliding toward cold twilight. I grabbed a cab and gave the driver West 72nd. While we bumped uptown, I replayed the note in my head and Wolfe's tone about people who name things. The title had been a clue before anyone knew it was a clue. Somebody in the Galen circle had taken that phrase and turned it into a lever. And by 7:30, we were going to have at least one of those somebodies sitting at our table trying to look like he wasn't listening to the curtains. The cab let me out in front of a building that had spent the last 80 years convincing passers-by it was responsible. Limestone shoulders, brass doors, and a lobby you could imagine a senator living in if he weren't afraid of the rent. I went in with my hat tipped at the angle that says, I belong somewhere even when I don't, and the uniformed doorman at the inner desk looked up. He was in his late 50s, brown skin, neat gray mustache, posture like a folded flag. Not the new guy. That had to be Karim. Afternoon, I said. Archie Goodwin. His eyes didn't widen, which told me Clara Vane's name was currency around here. Mr. Goodwin, he replied, and his voice had that respectful caution you use with strangers who might be friends of your employer. Miss Vane is not here. I know, she's visiting friends. I'm visiting her apartment with her permission. I flashed my most innocent grin. She asked me to check a thing for her. He studied me for one long second, and I could feel the line between polite and suspicious under his gaze. Then he reached for a small ledger. Do you have a letter? No letter. She's a lawyer, not a novelist. I kept it light. If you want, I can call her, but she may be in conference. He considered that, then nodded toward the elevator. I will send you up. Please understand we are careful. Careful is my favorite word when it applies to other people. I let him see I wasn't carrying anything but temperament and headed for the elevator. As the doors started to close, I caught a glance of a younger doorman by the street entrance. Fresh face, restless shoulders, watching Karim for cues. So the new guy existed. Good to know. Up on Clara's floor, the corridor was quiet enough to hear regret. Her door had the kind of lock the locksmiths of Manhattan dream about, a sleek double cylinder with a deadbolt that clicks like a verdict. I used the code she'd given me for the alarm panel inside, stepped in, and let the place tell me its story. She had been accurate about being meticulous. The living room looked staged for a catalogue called Competence. Leather sofa, clean glass table, books arranged by subject not color, a faint citrus smell, no ashtrays. Her desk in the corner had a laptop, 2 stacks of files squared like soldiers, and a brass lamp aimed with geometric purpose. The drapes were there on the west window, heavy, dark green, with a lining thick enough to smother daylight. They hung now with all the innocence drapes can muster. I didn't touch anything until I'd walked a slow circuit. I'm no technician, but I've been around enough staged scenes to know where guilt tends to leave mud on the carpet. The window behind the drapes was shut and latched. No pry marks. I ran my eye along the sill. Clean. The fire escape outside had a fresh coat of rust and no fresh footprints. I tugged the drapes lightly and felt their weight. If somebody had been behind them long enough to move them aside, they'd needed room. I looked down. The floor under the drapes was a tidy rectangle of bare wood. No scuffs where shoes had angled themselves to hide. That didn't prove anything except that whoever had stood there had either been careful or not been there. I checked the rest of the apartment. Bedroom neat, kitchen spare, bathroom too clean for treachery. No drawers open, no jewelry disturbed. If last night had been about searching for something, the searcher was either psychic or professional. But it hadn't been about searching. Wolfe had that right. Back in the living room, I stood in the middle and did what Wolfe taught me without ever admitting he'd taught me. I played the scene backward. Clara reading at the desk. 10:30. The room lit by that lamp, no fan, windows shut. Drape moves. She gets up, goes over, no one. She searches. Then later, note appears on the coffee table. If someone had been there, how did they vanish between drapes and her reaching them? The apartment was modest. No hidden passage unless pre-war buildings in this town had started coming with magicians' hatches. The front door was within view of the living room. A person dashing out would have to pass her or time it within a second. Not impossible, but risky. The only other avenue was the hall closet by the entry. I opened it carefully. Coats, 1 umbrella, a shoe rack. Nothing else. I closed it and stared at the drapes again. The note on the coffee table meant someone had made an entry after she went to bed. But the drape movement had happened while she was awake. Unless she dreamed it, which she hadn't, that suggested 2 visits, or 1 visit designed to create an impression without a body. I got on my knees and leaned toward the baseboard under the window. Nothing. No thread caught, no slipped pin, no hair. Then I saw the tiniest thing. A faint dust. Line on the far right baseboard, almost imperceptible, where a hand had brushed while pushing past. The dust itself wasn't much, just the natural drift of a city apartment. But the line was clean, a fresh pass. I held my breath and looked higher, at the drape edge. There, too, a slight irregularity in the nap where fabric had been pinched and released. Somebody had handled the drapes. Maybe last night, maybe earlier. But it gave me a direction. I went out, locked up, and went back down to the lobby before my brain could invent another one. Kareem looked up as I approached. "Everything all right, Mr. Goodwin?" "Depends on what you call all right." I leaned on the desk casually. "Miss Vane tells me you've known the Galens a long time." His face didn't change, but his eyes cooled. "Yes." "Then you probably know the people who come and go around her. Anyone stop in yesterday or last night? Family, staff, anyone you'd remember?" He thought carefully, which I respected. "Yesterday late afternoon a man came. I did not know him. He said he was from Huxley and Vane bringing papers. Miss Vane was expecting deliveries for the estate. What did he look like? 40, perhaps. Tall, dark coat. He carried a flat envelope. He frowned. I called her. She said to send him up. That's interesting. I kept my voice neutral. Did he leave? Yes, an hour later. And after that? Only residents. No visitors were recorded. After midnight, there was a service call for another apartment on the 7th. A plumber, but he did not come to this floor. A plumber after midnight, I said. New York loves drama. I watched him. Karim, would someone in this building be able to borrow a pass key? He stiffened. We do not lend keys. Of course not, but if someone asked on a pretext you trusted. His mouth pressed into a line. You are suggesting I would assist someone against her. I'm suggesting someone might count on you not wanting to doubt them. His eyes flicked away, just for a second. First crack. Who? You tell me. He cleared his throat. This man from her firm. He wore a cap low. I did not like his manner, but she authorized him. Could you describe the cap? Black, like a driver's. He kept the brim down. That was enough to make a picture, but not enough to hang it in a gallery. I thanked him and stepped aside, letting him return to his fortress of duty. The new doorman by the entrance was now talking to a tenant. I didn't bother him. The man Karim described could be an associate, a messenger, a fake with a decent suit, or a bidder's errand boy. But he'd had one crucial thing: permission to be inside. Permission is the best disguise in the world. Outside, the street had gone full dusk. I hailed another cab and headed downtown with my notebook feeling heavier than it should. At 7:30, we'd have Theo Galen in the brownstone, and Wolfe would be waiting with his chair, his beer, and the kind of calm that makes liars sweat through their collars. I planned to be there to watch the sweating start. I got back to the brownstone a shade after 7, which is late by Wolfe's standards and early by Fritz's. The kitchen was in that quiet, lethal phase where aromas float out like polite threats. I handed my hat to the rack, my coat to the same slat of air it always takes, and went to the office. Wolfe was at his desk, a book open but not being read. That meant he'd been waiting. He looked up the moment I stepped in. Well, he said. I crossed to my chair. Your client's apartment is as tidy as a surgeon's conscience. No sign of forced entry. The drapes were handled recently, enough to scuff the nap and wipe dust from the baseboard. Nothing else. Handled by whom? Wish I knew. But I had a talk with Karim downstairs, loyal to the Galens, as Miss Vane warned. He said yesterday afternoon a man came up claiming to be from her firm, with a flat envelope. Karim called her, she okayed it, sent him up. He left an hour later. Karim didn't like his manner and couldn't place him. Cap low, black driver's style. Wolfe's fingers touched each other lightly. So, an admitted visitor. That may account for the nocturnal note. Except the note showed up this morning and the visitor left in daylight. Unless he planted it early and trusted time to do the scaring. Or he returned. Wolfe's eyes were half shut now, thinking. Did Karim register a return? He says no visitors after, but says has elasticity. Indeed. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Was this visitor tall? Karim says around 40, tall, dark coat. Wolfe made a sound I knew well. He'd just pinned a thought to the board. You will attempt to obtain a list of associates employed by Huxley and Vane. There may be a man who is not, in fact, employed there. Already ahead of you, I'll call their office tomorrow and ask in the mildest possible way whether they keep strangers on payroll. Tonight you will say little unless I ask. Ah, I said, the Archie muzzle rule. I remember. You occasionally forget. I only forget in the presence of temptation. I tapped my notebook. One more thing. Karim mentioned a midnight plumber call in the building, but not her floor. Probably nothing. In New York, midnight plumbers are either saints or burglars. Wolfe grunted. Probably saints. Burglars are rarely punctual. Fritz appeared in the doorway with that solemn look he wears when he's about to bring civilization into a room. "Herr Wolfe, dinner is served." Wolfe rose with the smallest sigh a man his size can manage, lumbered out, and I followed. We found Clara Vane already at the table, sitting straight in a way that made it clear she'd tried to relax and failed. Fritz had put her at Wolfe's right, which is his sign of respect and also a tactical shield. If the guest is nervous, Wolfe likes to have the nervousness close. "How was your rest?" Wolfe asked as he sat. "Quiet," she said. "Too quiet to be convincing." "Quiet is not required to be convincing." Wolfe unfolded his napkin with ceremony. "Only to be observed." That was his version of reassurance. It worked about as well as a locked door in a house fire. But she nodded. We were on the salad when the doorbell rang. Fritz brought Theo Galen in. The man was in his mid-30s. Lean the way some rich men are lean because they don't need to carry anything themselves. He had a face that might have been handsome if it hadn't been clenched into a permanent argument. Dark hair brushed back with impatience, eyes bright and tired at once. He wore a navy coat and no hat, as if hats were a concession. His gaze landed on Clara Vane and stuck there a beat too long. "Miss Vane," he said. Not cordial, not hostile, just loaded. "Theo," she replied, equally measured. Wolfe didn't rise. He inclined his head. "Mr. Galen, sit. You're welcome to my table." Theo took the chair Fritz indicated, across from Clara. He looked from her to Wolfe to me as if he expected us to start singing. "I wasn't told there'd be an audience," he said. "You were told there would be dinner," Wolfe replied. "My dinners include whoever is pertinent. You are pertinent." Theo's jaw twitched. "Pertinent to what? There's no crime. There's just a family that wants to keep its property." "Families," Wolfe said, "are often where crime begins." "Eat." The veal stew Fritz set before us could have made a priest reconsider vows, but Theo stared at it like a bribe. Clara ate small, neat bites. Wolfe ate with slow conviction. I did my part heroically. For a few minutes there was only cutlery and the soft city hum outside. Theo seemed to be waiting for the ambush. Wolfe was letting him simmer. When Wolfe finally spoke, it was in that mild voice that always hides a blade. "Mr. Galen," he said, "yesterday you met with Miss Vane and were displeased." Theo laughed once, sharp. "Displeased? She told me the only way to keep my grandfather's painting from being sold off to some private hoarder is to outbid millionaires. That's not displeasing. That's insulting." "You accused her of favoring outside buyers." "I accused her of being too eager to please her firm. She isn't a Galen in practice. She's a lawyer." Clara set down her fork. "Theo, I am following the will. Your grandfather stipulated that the estate be liquidated unless the family could buy back specific pieces at fair market value. I didn't draft it." "He drafted it in grief," Theo snapped, at the end. "You know it." Wolfe lifted a hand, palm outward. The room obeyed at once. "It's one of his nicer tricks. You will not rehearse your quarrel here," he said. "You will answer questions. First, where were you last night at 10:30? Theo blinked. "What?" "At 10:30, Wolfe said patiently. "In Miss Vane's apartment, a curtain moved without wind. She believed a person was behind it. This morning, a typed note using the painting's title appeared on her coffee table. I'm investigating who wished to impress her with that title. Therefore, I ask your whereabouts." Theo stared. His color rose, then settled into a chilly red. "This is absurd," he said. "You think I was sneaking around her apartment to frighten her into, what? Taking less money? I want her to stop talking about money. I want the painting not sold." "Answer," Wolfe said. Theo opened his mouth, closed it, then said, "Last night I was at my sister Petra's." West End Avenue. We had dinner. I left around 11. Clara's eyes didn't leave him. Petra can confirm. Yes, and our brother Silas was there too. He glared at Wolfe. Happy now? Moderately, Wolfe said. Second question. Did you send anyone to Miss Vane yesterday afternoon with papers? Theo looked genuinely startled. No. Yesterday afternoon I was at the estate storage facility with Julian Culp. We were reviewing the catalogue. Wolfe's eyebrows lifted a millimeter. You were with Mr. Culp? Yes. That was not one of my questions, Wolfe said. But it is helpful. Theo pushed his bowl away. Why am I here, Mr. Wolfe? If someone's threatening Clara, it's one of those bidders she cut loose. Roussel, Ives, Reinhardt. People who buy their way into whatever they want. I'm the only one in this mess who doesn't want leverage. I want the whole thing to stop. Wolfe looked at him as if appraising a chess piece. You want it to stop, he said. Then you should be concerned that someone else wants it to continue, on their terms. If Miss Vane is coerced into error, your family's position weakens. That harms you. Therefore, your innocence is not sufficient. You must help me. Theo's nostrils flared. I watched his hands. The fingers were clean, no ink smudges, no paper nicks. Not the hands of a man who typed threats last night, but hands can be laundered. Temper can't. What do you need? He said tight. Names, Wolfe said softly. People who know the painting's title and people who would dare use it against an executor. Theo hesitated. And in that hesitation I saw something flicker. Less like guilt, more like calculation. Then he said, Everyone on the estate council knows the title. Anyone who's handled the catalogue. Julian, Sidonia Pike. The bidders' council, maybe. And my Aunt Beatrice. She likes to quote things to make points. Wolfe nodded once, like a lock turning. Good, he said. We will invite them. Theo didn't like that last sentence any more than a man likes being told he's about to meet the dentist, but he had enough sense to keep quiet while Fritz cleared the plates. Wolfe let the dining room breathe for a minute. Coffee, cognac for himself, nothing for the rest of us unless we asked. Theo didn't. Clara didn't. I did, because I'm a citizen. When Fritz was gone and the house had settled into that post-dinner hush Wolfe loves, he leaned back and fixed Theo with a look that could polish brass. You said you were at the storage facility yesterday afternoon with Mr. Culp, he began. Yes, Theo said. We were reviewing the catalogue. Why? Theo's lips tightened. Because if the thing is going to be sold, I want to make sure the catalogue isn't doctored, that the provenance is right, the condition reports are honest, the estimates are not inflated to steer the sale. Who would steer it? Anyone who profits from it. Theo glanced at Clara, then away. The advisors, the dealers, even Sidonia Pike if she's protecting her pet heirs. Clara's voice was level. Sidonia's a lawyer, not a conspirator. Those categories overlap, Theo snapped. Wolfe lifted a finger. Theo stopped. He looked annoyed at himself for stopping, which I filed under inconveniences he will try to repay later. You distrust Mr. Culp? Wolfe asked. I don't trust anyone who makes money on a percentage of a painting's value, Theo said. How much does he make? Theo shrugged. 2% on the sale, plus consultation fees. It's standard. Standard greed is still greed. Wolfe said it mildly, as if remarking on gravy. Have you quarreled with him? I've accused him of feeding the bidders information to sweeten his own cut. He denies it, smoothly. And yesterday? Yesterday he was unusually agreeable. He showed me the catalogue entries, explained the numbers, avoided his usual sermon about liquidity. It was like he'd been told to charm me. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. By whom? Theo opened his mouth, then shut it. I don't know, but he isn't the man who gets soft overnight without a reason. Wolfe took a sip of beer. Miss Vane. Yesterday afternoon, a man visited your apartment claiming to be from your firm. You authorized his entry. Who did you expect? She frowned, and I could see the answer being assembled in her mind from legal scraps. A courier from our office. Julian called and said he'd send over the latest condition addenda for me to review at home. He said it was urgent. Julian Culp called you? Yes. At what time? About 4. Did he identify the courier? No. He said one of your people. I assumed he meant an associate or a runner. We have messengers all the time. Wolfe stared at her for a full beat. Then it is possible you admitted a stranger on Mr. Culp's recommendation. Clara's posture stiffened. Possible, yes. But why would Julian do that? He doesn't benefit from frightening me. Not directly. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. But he benefits from influencing your decisions. Fear is a form of influence. Theo leaned forward, the chair complaining softly. You think Julian sent someone to my cousin's apartment to scare her? I have not said that. Wolfe said it like a reprimand to a child who finishes sentences too eagerly. I merely observed that the stranger was introduced by Mr. Culp, and that the threat uses the painting's title, which Mr. Culp knows well. Theo's eyes narrowed. So do I. Yes, so does your Aunt Beatrice, your siblings, Miss Pike, perhaps Bidder's counsel. Many people have access, but not many can insert a stranger into Miss Vane's home with her consent. Clara's voice was tight now. Julian wouldn't risk the estate. Risk is often misjudged, Wolfe replied, especially by men who think themselves indispensable. I'd been listening without much of my usual wisecrack commentary, partly because Wolfe had given me the muzzle rule, and partly because I was watching Clara. She wasn't defending Culp as a friend. She was defending him as a structure. If the advisor was rotten, the whole estate apparatus started to wobble, and she'd been standing on it alone. Theo wasn't standing on anything but a grudge. That made him useful. Wolfe turned to him. You will go now. Theo blinked. Go? Yes. You will return to West End Avenue and resume your evening as if nothing happened. But you will telephone your sister Petra and your brother Silas and tell them I wish to see them tomorrow afternoon at 4. Here, you will also telephone your Aunt Beatrice. I will speak to her myself if she agrees to come. If she refuses, tell her I will appear at her residence. She will not like that. Wolfe paused, then added, Neither will I. Theo looked like he wanted to argue, but he was a Galen, and Galens, from what I'd seen, respected willpower, even when they hated the willer. All right, he said finally. I can do that. Good. Also, Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Do not warn Mr. Culp or Miss Pike. Theo's head jerked. Why not? Because if they are innocent, warning them gains nothing. If they are not, warning them harms me. Theo exhaled through his nose, a brief surrender. Fine. He stood. Clara stood too, as if the air between them was made of old vows. He hesitated, then said low, Clara, I meant what I said earlier at your office. This is family. Her eyes met his. Steady. Then act like it. He looked away first. Fritz showed him out. The door closed. The brownstone settled a notch deeper into opportunity. Wolfe turned to Clara. Now I will ask you what I did not ask at dinner. She braced without showing it. All right. Did you tell anyone besides the executors that you intended to reject those bids yesterday? No. I told my partners. And Saul Panzer is not one of them, if that's what you mean. Her tone had a flicker of humor. I kept it tight. Did you speak to any bidder or their representatives by telephone afterward? Only Marian Ives's counsel. A brief call to confirm receipt of the rejection letter. Did she respond emotionally? She didn't respond at all. Her counsel did. He was polite. Too polite. She frowned. There was something odd. He asked if my decision was final or if I anticipated reconsidering under pressure. I thought it was just loyally hedge. Wolfe's eyes went half shut again. Perhaps not. I sat back, letting that ride, because I could feel a new groove forming in Wolfe's mind. Pressure, reconsideration, a courier introduced by Culp, a counsel hinting at coercion before coercion was visible. It was all starting to hum. Wolfe opened his eyes and looked at me. "Archie, telephone Saul Panzer. Tell him I want discreet inquiries tonight on Julian Culp's background and finances and on who has access to the Galen storage facility." On it. I stood. Clara looked from Wolfe to me. "Do you truly think, Julian—" "I think," Wolfe said, cutting in gently, "that someone is moving a curtain. We will find who is behind it. You will sleep now. Fritz will show you where. I prefer my clients alive and rested." She hesitated, then, because she was sensible under strain, nodded and left the room. When I got to the phone, Wolfe called after me, "And Archie." "Yeah?" "Ask Saul also about Marian Ives's counsel. I dislike prescience." That was Wolfe, for I think the man knows too much. I dialed Saul, and while it rang, I looked up at the dark rectangle of the front window drapes. They hung still, but in my head I could see them move. Just a brush, just a whisper of fabric. And behind them, not air, but intention. Saul picked up on the second ring, which meant either I'd interrupted a nap or he'd already been expecting a call from our zip code. "Goodwin," he said. "Panzer, you're on night duty. Wolfe wants discreet dirt, financial and personal, on Julian Culp, plus who has access to the Galen storage facility, and check Marian Ives's counsel for being too prophetic." A beat. "You're making me nostalgic. Any time frame?" "Tonight. Quietly. If you step on toes, step on rich ones." "You're such a humanitarian. I'll call when I have something." When I hung up, Wolfe looked pleased in that way that resembles constipation, but isn't. I went upstairs to my room, not to sleep, but to file my notes and keep one ear on the stairs. Wolfe likes silence at night. I like being awake in it, in case it turns into noise. A little after 10, I heard Fritz's soft tread and his murmured good night to Clara somewhere down the hall. Then the brownstone settled into its cathedral hush, broken only by a taxi groaning past or a radiator deciding to practice opera. I was half into a cigarette at my window, blowing it outwards so the house wouldn't accuse me of chemical warfare, when the phone in my room rang. Saul again. "Efficient." "Got pieces," he said. "Not the whole puzzle yet, but enough to make you stare at the picture on the box." "Staring is my cardio. Go." Julian Culp has been in the Galen orbit 8 years. Art advisor, cataloguing, valuation, the works. He's not a bloodhound. He's a lapdog with a pedigree. But he's got a new set of teeth. 3 months ago he took a loan against future commissions. Quite a large one. Lender's a private outfit. Terms brutal. He's under pressure to see this sale through at a high number, and quickly. That landed in my head like a neat stack of bricks. So if the estate stalls, he chokes. Exactly. Second, access to storage facility. It's called Larchmont Secure Arts, Long Island City. Keyed vaults, staff, cameras. Access list includes the 3 executors, Culp, Sidonia Pike, and Lenore Vale, the family house manager, plus the facility manager, a guy named Harlan Pete. No bidders officially on the list. Officially is such a squishy word. Third, Marian Ives's counsel. Name's Everett Bly. He's polite because he's a shark who learned manners. He and Culp had lunch yesterday, 2 hours, at Le Corbeau. Watchers saw them together, topic unknown. But Bly left with a portfolio. So either art chatter or plotting. I whistled softly. "You're an artist, Saul." "Don't tell Wolfe. He'll start feeding me orchids. Anything else?" "Maybe. Do you have any reason to think Culp could have sent someone to Clara Vane's apartment?" A pause. "He has a nephew. 22, works occasionally as a runner for firms. Black driver's cap is his style, apparently. I'll get a name by morning." That's already better than breakfast. Thanks. Keep your head down. Loans with brutal terms can make men stupid. You've met my employer. I'll do my best. I hung up and sat there a second to let it settle. If Culp was in financial trouble and Ives's counsel was breaking bread with him the same day Clara started getting spooked, the wind behind the curtain had a drafty shape. I went downstairs to Wolfe's office. There was a light on. Naturally. He was at his desk with a volume in his hand that he wasn't reading. He looked up when I came in. Mr. Panzer? Fresh from the Panzer mill. I gave him the digest. Loan, pressure to sell, access list, lunch with Everett Bligh, nephew with a cap. Wolfe's eyes shut for 3 seconds while he arranged the facts like silverware. Then he opened them and said, Culp in debt. Counsel in conference. Threat referencing the painting's title. It is not proof, but it is a direction. Direction toward Culp pulling strings for Ives? Possibly. Or Bligh pulling Culp, or both pulling something else. Wolfe's voice was even. But I do not yet accept that the intimidation of Miss Vane is solely to accelerate the sale. Because if one merely wishes to accelerate a sale, one influences the executors through ordinary pressure. Threats are crude. The note is theatrical. Someone wanted her to feel watched in her own room. That implies more than speed. It implies control. Or punishment. Perhaps. Wolfe's fingers tapped once on the blotter. Tomorrow at 4 we have Petra and Silas Galen. I will require Mr. Culp and Miss Pike as well. Want me to invite them, or should I send a singing telegram? You will telephone Culp at 9. Tell him the words urgent and estate integrity. He will come. He needs to demonstrate usefulness. And Sidonia Pike? She will come because she thinks she cannot afford not to. Lawyers are moral cowards in one particular respect. They fear appearing irrelevant. I grinned. I've dated a few. Checks out. Wolfe ignored that. Also, Archie, you will go to Larchmont Secure Arts tomorrow morning. Ah, field trips. Yes. Speak to their manager. Examine the security logs. Determine whether anyone accessed the vault housing the Venetian painting recently besides the authorized list. Consider it my day with culture. I turned to go, then remembered something and looked back. Wolfe, if Culp's nephew played courier yesterday, that gets us a body behind the drapes at least once. But it doesn't explain how the curtain moved while Clara was awake. Wolfe regarded me, calm and heavy as stone. No, it does not. Any hunch? A hunch is merely an unshaven deduction, but I will share one. The curtain movement may not have required a person at all. I felt my eyebrows lift. You mean a gadget? I mean a device, a string, an air current introduced subtly, or manipulation of light and shadow to create the perception of movement. A clever mind can terrify without entering a room. Lovely. So the ghost might have been a stagehand. Exactly. And stagehands do not perform without a script. We will find the author. He picked up his book again, which meant he was done talking. I went upstairs with my notes and my cigarette craving, thinking about authors and scripts and the kind of men who borrow against the future. If tomorrow morning at Long Island City turned up a missing brushstroke in the security story, we'd be on our way. And if it didn't, we'd still be on our way because Wolfe never needs a road. He just needs a direction, and he already had one. By the next afternoon, the brownstone had the feeling of a theater a minute before the curtain rises. Quiet, arranged, and slightly dangerous if you don't know where to stand. Wolfe was in the office with the windows cracked a respectable inch, to let in air without letting in the city. Fritz had set out chairs like a man preparing for a polite siege. I was at my desk with a pad that already had more names on it than a Russian novel. Clara Vane came down a little before 4, composed, the way people look when they've decided to be brave, whether it suits them or not. She nodded to me, nodded to Wolfe, sat where Wolfe indicated, and folded her hands on her lap like a witness about to be sworn in. At 4 sharp, The doorbell went. Fritz brought in Petra Galen first. She was Theo's opposite in most visible ways, mid-30s, sleek black hair cut to the jaw, scarf thrown around her neck with a bohemian gesture that probably cost money, eyes cool and watchful. She kissed Clara's cheek with a kind of affection that can be either genuine or a warning. Silas Galen followed, taller, looser, an amiable face that might have been pleasant if it weren't strained by recent sleeplessness. He gave Clara a quick hug that felt real enough to me, then looked at Wolfe like a man landing in a foreign country. He sat and immediately began fidgeting with his cufflink. Then Julian Culp arrived, a minute late. He came in a camel hair coat, fine shoes, expensive fatigue around the eyes. He had the restless smile of a man who makes his living soothing wealthy people and secretly resents every soothing minute. He was cordial to Clara, deferential to Wolfe, and gave me a quick once-over that landed on my notebook as if it were a weapon. Sidonia Pike came last, which meant she had timed it. She was in her late 40s, sharp as pressed linen, hair pinned in a way that said she could argue in court at a moment's notice without checking a mirror. She carried a slim briefcase and the aura of someone who expects people to clear paths for her by instinct. When Fritz showed her to a chair, she nodded as if granting the brownstone temporary amnesty. Wolfe waited until Fritz shut the door. Then he looked at them all without moving anything but his eyes. "I've asked you here," he said, "because a matter concerning the Galen estate has become contaminated by coercion. One of the executors, Miss Vane, was threatened. The threat used the title of the Venetian painting at the center of your dispute. That title is not public. Therefore, the threat came from within your circle." No one spoke. You could hear the old clock in the hall counting. Wolfe turned his head slightly toward Culp. "Mr. Culp, yesterday afternoon a courier visited Miss Vane's apartment with documents you said were urgent. You telephoned her and recommended she admit him. Did you know that courier?" Culp blinked once too fast. "He was, yes, a runner from her firm." "Name him." Culp hesitated, and I watched the hesitation ripple right to his mouth. "I didn't catch it. It wasn't important." "It was important," Wolfe said. "Try again." Culp's lips pressed thin. "All right. It was my nephew, Eric. He sometimes does errands for me." Clara's eyes snapped to him. "Julian, you told me it was from my office." "He helps with estates sometimes," Culp said quickly. "I said one of your people because he's been around the process. I didn't think you'd object." "Did you instruct him to enter her apartment after she went to bed and leave a threat on her coffee table?" Wolfe asked. Culp's face reddened under the tan of his good life. "Absolutely not." "Did you instruct him to hide behind her drapes at 10:30 and move them?" Culp looked at Wolfe like he'd been slapped. "That's insane." "Insanity," Wolfe murmured, "is often an alibi of convenience." Silas shifted. Petra went very still. Wolfe looked to Clara. "Miss Vane, please tell them precisely what occurred last night and what you found this morning." She did. Calm, clean, no embellishment. When she finished, Sidonia Pike inhaled sharply. "This is exactly why I advised the executors to involve law enforcement," Pike said. "You advised that today," Wolfe said. "You did not advise it yesterday." "Why?" Pike stiffened. "Because yesterday there was no evidence of a crime. And today there is a clear attempt to influence the estate's decisions by intimidation. That is criminal." Wolfe nodded once. "Very good. But you are not here to advise me. You are here to be examined." Pike's nostrils flared, but she said nothing. Wolfe leaned back half an inch. "Archie, the item you retrieved this morning." I stood, went to the cabinet, brought out a folder. "From Larchmont Secure Arts," I said, and set it on Wolfe's desk. I had gone there at 10. The manager, Harlan Pete, was a man who loved two things: security, and being told he was good at security. Wolfe's name had done the flattering for me. Pete had shown me the vault access logs, camera timestamps, and keycard records. Everything looked pristine until you remembered that pristine is sometimes what manipulation aims for. Wolfe opened the folder. Here are the access records for the vault containing the Venetian painting. The last authorized visit before yesterday was 2 weeks ago by all 3 executors together. Yesterday afternoon, 2 people entered, Theo Galen and Julian Culp. That is acknowledged. But last night at 11:47, someone entered the storage facility using an authorized code. Silas frowned. That's not possible. The facility shuts access at 10 unless a pre-cleared appointment is on file. Unless, Wolfe said, your managerial Mr. Pete is persuaded that an executor called to approve an emergency condition inspection. He tapped the paper. The caller used Miss Vane's personal security phrase. Clara stiffened. I didn't call. I know. Wolfe looked at her gravely. Someone who had access to your confidential file did. Pike's head lifted a fraction. Her phrase is held in the estate's legal packet. Only executors and counsel have it. Or anyone you showed it to, Wolfe said. At the storage facility, for example. Yesterday you reviewed the catalogue with Mr. Culp. Did you, in that process, handle the legal packet? Clara's brow creased. Yes. Julian asked to see the insurance appendix. I had it with me. Then he had opportunity to observe your phrase. Wolfe turned to Culp. At 11:47, your nephew, or another proxy, entered the facility as if he were Miss Vane. At midnight he accessed the vault, not to steal the painting, but to remove something else. What? Culp's mouth opened, and he looked around as if hoping one of the Galens would rescue him by being louder. Petra said coldly, What did you remove, Julian? Silas whispered, Julian. Culp licked his lips. I didn't remove anything. Wolfe's voice stayed mild. The facility camera shows a person leaving the vault with a flat object in a padded sleeve. Too small to be the painting. It resembled a panel, perhaps from the crate's internal frame. Silas's face went pale. The backing board? Clara turned sharply. The condition board from inside the crate. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. The board that bears the most recent conservation notes and microscopic pigment analysis. The board that would show whether the painting is in the state you reported to bidders 3 weeks ago. Silence like a snapped wire. Pike's voice was quiet and lethal. You're suggesting an alteration? I'm stating one, Wolfe replied. Mr. Culp, sometime within the last month you discovered a flaw in the painting, a restoration instability, a micro-cracking in the varnish, or worse. A flaw that would reduce its estimate. If the flaw became known, the sale might be postponed or renegotiated. Culp's jaw worked. Sweat had started to shine at his temple. You are in debt, Wolfe went on, against future commissions. You're under brutal terms. You require a rapid sale at a high number. Therefore, the flaw could not be allowed to surface. So you removed the condition board and replaced it with an older one from a prior inspection, one that shows the painting pristine. Clara's voice was sharp with betrayal. Julian, did you do that? Culp raised both hands in a gesture that tried to be reasonable and landed in panic. You don't understand. This estate is drowning in bickering. If that flaw became a public issue, the siblings would litigate for years. The market would cool. The bidders would scatter. Everyone would lose. Except you, Petra said. You'd lose your commission, which is what you meant. Culp turned to her. Petra, you hate the sale too. You should want it delayed. I want it honest, she snapped. You made it a fraud. Wolfe watched Culp with the patience of a man waiting for a kettle to boil. You removed the board last night because Miss Vane's rejection letters made you fear she might request an independent inspection before finalizing terms. You needed to be sure the evidence of the flaw was gone. Culp's shoulders sagged. That was the moment a man realizes he isn't fighting anyone anymore, including himself. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "Yes, I took it." He swallowed. "I didn't think I could keep lying if she asked for a fresh report. I thought, if I could get through the sale, the new owner could handle restoration quietly. The family wouldn't be torn apart. I'd pay off the loan." "And the intimidation?" Wolfe asked. Culp shut his eyes. "The note was mine, I admit it. I wanted her unsettled, pliable. I couldn't risk her digging. She's stubborn as hell." He opened his eyes and looked at Clara with something like apology and something like resentment. "The curtain thing. That wasn't supposed to happen while you were awake. Eric went up in the afternoon like I told him. He checked your drapes, tied a thin nylon line to the pull, ran it behind your desk chair. I told him to tug it at night from the hall and then slip in with the note after you slept. He pulled it too early, panicked, and yanked it while you were in the room. When you went over, he was already out in the stairwell. The line snapped free. I didn't know until this morning. There it was. The whole ugly, ordinary mechanism of a fancy threat. A string, a nephew, a debt, and a man who thought he could write the ending before reality read the draft. Clara sat very still. I don't know what hurt most, the betrayal or the realization that her fear had been engineered like a stage trick. Pike had gone rigid with professional outrage. "Julian, you realize this is criminal misrepresentation of estate assets and attempted coercion of an executor. I will be contacting the district attorney." "You will do what you must," Wolfe said. "I will provide the records. Mr. Culp, you will also provide the removed board and any replacement you installed. If you do not, Mr. Goodwin will retrieve them with police assistance." Culp's voice cracked. "They're in my office safe. I'll hand them over." "Good." Wolfe turned his big head toward Clara. "Now you know what was behind your curtain." She exhaled slowly. "Yes." "And the bidders?" Silas asked quietly. "Were any of them involved?" Wolfe shook his head once. "Mr. Panzer's inquiries show Mr. Culp met with Everett Bligh, counsel to Marion Ives. Mr. Bligh pressed for prescience because he had been assured by Mr. Culp that a sale would proceed swiftly regardless of internal resistance. He was not complicit in the intimidation. He was merely opportunistic, and I will inform him that his advisor's assurances were fraudulent." Petra's face was pale now, not with fear, but with something like grief for the family theater they'd all been performing. "So the painting is damaged?" Clara looked at Wolfe. Wolfe said, "It is flawed, not ruined, but the market must now reflect the truth. If the family wishes to retain it, this may improve its affordability. If not, it will still sell. Honestly." Theo would have liked that part, I thought. He wasn't here to hear it, but he'd learn it soon enough. Wolfe waved a hand at Fritz, who had been hovering discreetly outside the office door. Fritz stepped in, poised like a man who loves peace and hates to see it disturbed. "Fritz, please telephone Inspector Kramer. Tell him I have a tidy package involving the Galen estate and that he may come now or regret it later." Fritz nodded and left without a word, because to Fritz, calling the police is like adding salt. Distasteful, but sometimes necessary. Culp slumped in his chair. Sidonia Pike sat upright, already thinking in statutes. Petra looked at Silas. Silas looked at the floor. Clara Vane stared at the blank space on Wolfe's desk where the note had once been. Wolfe addressed her quietly. "Miss Vane, you did not succumb to your fear. That is to your credit. But your caution was used against you because you trusted the wrong man with access." "I know," she said. Her voice had a hard edge now. It was the edge of someone who will be more careful in a different way next time. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe." "Do not thank me," he said, as he always did. "Thank your own stubbornness." Kramer arrived 20 minutes later in a mood that wanted to be annoyed and couldn't find the foothold. Wolfe handed him the log copies. Saul's notes, my observations, and Culp himself, who didn't resist because there wasn't any point left. When they were gone and the house was quiet again, Clara stood in the doorway to the office. "I'll go back to my apartment tonight," she said. "The doormen will get a new policy." "Good," Wolfe said. "And the estate will get a new advisor." She paused. "Mr. Wolfe, when I first came here, I thought my fear was a weakness." "It was," Wolfe said evenly. "But you did not let it govern you. That is strength." She nodded, absorbed that, then left to fetch her coat. I sat down, feeling the release that comes after a room full of tension goes empty. Wolfe stayed in his chair, looking not triumphant but satiated, like a man who has eaten the correct meal. After a while, he said, almost to himself, "It is always the same folly. Men borrow against the future and then attempt to counterfeit the present." I grinned. "You should put that on a plaque. Maybe hang it behind the orchids." He frowned at me. "Do not be impertinent. Orchids are innocent." "Sure, and so are curtains till someone gives them a string." Wolfe's mouth softened a fraction. "It might have been a smile if you were generous." "Yes," he said, "and strings, Archie, are the easiest things in the world to pull, until one pulls the wrong one." Fritz entered to announce dinner. Late supper, really, but in the brownstone the clock bends to Wolfe's appetite. We walked to the dining room, the house settling into its old silence like a coat put back on the hook. Outside, New York kept rushing, bribing, panicking, and pretending it wasn't full of men like Julian Culp. Inside, the curtain hung still, because the wind had been named and the stagehand dismissed. I took my seat, picked up my napkin, and thought that if there's justice in the world, it's usually not loud. It's a big man in a chair saying "therefore," and a string snapping in the dark.